Welcome. In this segment, we're going to talk to Dr. Shanna Qatari, a social work faculty member and a social justice policy advocate, specifically about disability policy and the work with the American Disabilities Act and Universal Design. So thank you, Dr. Qatari, Shanna, for joining with us today. In our brief interview, I thought that you could start by telling us a little bit about ADA policy and a little bit of the context around your work.
Yeah, absolutely. So just one caveat up front. Language is always constantly changing and shifting, and so you'll notice I use both the term people with disabilities, which is what folks identify as person-first language, and disabled people, which is what people use as identity-first language. And oftentimes people feel very strongly about one or the other, but members of the disability community use both, some interchangeably, and some feel that one is right and the other is right, so I will use kind of both interchangeably. So the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, is a federal act that came out in 1990. So it's really not that old, hasn't quite turned 30 yet. And it's what people really think of as this gold standard for disability inclusion. We have this act, yay, ADA. And it's wonderful in many ways, because before this, it was completely illegal in any way, shape, or form to discriminate against people with disabilities. However, while this act is great in some ways, one of the biggest issues that it has is that it has no teeth. And so while it says you cannot discriminate in these many ways, there is no real piece that's going out into the community and saying, you know, these stairs are not accessible to this building, or this child is not getting access to their education in the way that they need. And in fact, it's only enforced through lawsuits. And so if someone sues and says, you know, my job did not provide my legal accommodations, then they can sue to get the accommodations, but only less than 2% of the cases are actually found in favor of the person who's suing. And people cannot benefit financially in any way from a lawsuit. So even if you are fired from somewhere, you lose your income, it's this horrible situation, you sue them, it takes months to get through the court process and through the appeals, and they are found to be in the wrong, the best that can happen for you is you get your job back at the company that you just spent months suing. There's actually nothing, you can't get any benefits from it, you can't get any money to cover back pay. It's really problematic in that way. Similarly, there's no money to support it. And so you might go somewhere and say, you know, these buildings are old, they need to be retrofitted with an elevator. Or, you know, the way that you talk to this community to make it more accessible, you need to have an interpreter. But there's no money that goes with the ADA. And so we're asking people to make necessary changes, but not only are we not enforcing it, we're not enabling them to do it. So it's a great policy for what it is. It at least starts the conversation, but I think people think it has a lot more power than it actually does.
So it sounds like maybe this universal design approach to policy making would be a potential solution.
Absolutely. So the idea of universal design is, how do we make the world as inclusive and accessible for everybody in advance when we're designing it, when we're planning it, when we're creating it, rather than coming back retroactively and saying, what do we need to do to make an accommodation? So when we're building a building, how do we build in ramps and elevators as part of the initial design so it looks pretty, it looks inviting, it's accessible to the building, rather than later on going back and saying, oh, we need to add a service elevator in the back by the dock so that someone in a wheelchair can get up. When we're building sidewalks, how do we have wide enough curb cuts everywhere? Because that benefits everyone. It benefits people on bicycles. It benefits people in wheelchairs and scooters. It benefits people who have strollers. How do we create spaces that are as accessible as possible to start with? And this also means in everything from press conferences to classroom settings, having someone who is a sign language interpreter who's available for everything, building in money to grants so that people can interpret. So rather than panicking at the last minute when someone needs an interpreter, saying, thank you so much for asking, we have someone on call, they'll be here, they're familiar with our content, and you're good to go. Thinking about creating settings, whether in a classroom, in a social work group setting, in a community organization where there are chairs that are always reserved for disabled folks who either have high anxiety and need to be able to leave easily, who use a wheelchair, who have a service animal, but also for folks who are running late, also for folks who have kids and need to also be able to get up and move. And so the idea of universal design is, rather than accommodating an individual who has specific needs, is creating really welcoming, warm, inclusive communities, and it benefits everyone. So, for example, gender-inclusive single-stall bathrooms are great for folks who are trans and non-binary, but they're also great for folks who have young kids. They're also great for people with disabilities. They're also great for folks who are caretaking for an elder parent. So really thinking ahead to create policies and to fund policies that require a more inclusive look at things proactively rather than retroactively.
Great. Thank you very much for sharing this an understanding of universal design and its importance for all of us in thinking about policy making moving forward.
Yeah.
And thank you for watching.